On my last video, I talked about the history of the Xianzhou Alliance, but I deliberately leave out the 3 Wars of Abundance because I think it's too long to put in that video. Today, this video will be covering the history of the Xianzhou Alliance, Denizens of Abundance Wars. I'm your down-to-earth Honkai Star Rail enjoyer Icicle, and I read Honkai Star Rail lore and secrets so then you don't need to blow your mind just to find a piece of readable items in the corner of a hidden room. So, let's begin. The Denizens of Abundance War are large-scale conflicts that have occurred between the Xianzhou Alliance and the Denizens of Abundance. Currently, there has been 3 documented wars. First War of Abundance, Flaming Catastrophe. Note that while not directly referred to as the First Abundance War, the Flaming Catastrophe is the conflict that directly resulted in the official formation of the Xianzhou Alliance united under the Hunt, and it is arguably the most significant conflict that shaped the alliance into what is today. Additionally, Yue Yan notes how Mudrasil was destroyed directly after the First Abundance War, and the Flaming Catastrophe is the only known conflict prior to Mudrasil's destruction on the scale of the Abundance Wars. Around year 3400, at the time, the Xianzhou Zhuming detected gravity waves from a massive object but failed to capture any light signals. Only when the Xianzhou fleet drew nearer did the stargazers realize that this massive object was a whirl of trees feeding off nearby stars. It was also the mortal enemy of the primeval Imperium, Mudrasil, homeland of the Wingweavers. What petrified the Xianzhou even more was that the ship behemoths of the Viscorpi also appeared. The Viscorpi were directed by the Wingweavers, and the 2 races were living in a symbiotic relationship. As if attracted by the power of the Ambrosial Arbor, Mudrasil slowly began approaching the Luofu, and the most epic battle in the history of the Xianzhou soon broke out. Fatigued from the living catastrophe before, the Automaton Rebellion and their immigration plan, all prisoners in cryohibernation are released to counter the invasion, including the Rainbow Arbiter. Note that this version of the Rainbow Arbiter is not the one we know as the Aeon of the Hunt. It was just a myth that this version of the Aeon comes from the Xianzhou Alliance before they ascended to Aeonhood. It was rumored that the Rainbow and the Flint Emperor make a deal, allowing the Flint Emperor to possess their physical body in exchange for the power of the Helobite. Inspired by the Rainbow sacrifice, the Xianzhou residents make the same deal, forming suicide squads and marching alongside the Helobite. This is the origin of the name Cloud Knights. The ships of the Xianzhou Alliance enters battle formation in this order, from the nearest to Mudrasil to the furthest, the Yaoqing, the Luofu, the Yuque, the Zhuming, the Fanghu, the Changcheng, and the Xuling. After this, the Rainbow Arbiter officially appears as the Aeon of the Hunt and shoots their sky-shattering Lux arrow from the bow of the Yaoqing using their famed bow Xuan Yuan, causing great casualties among even the furthest ship, the Xuling and the Fanghu. The arrow smashes into the Ambrosial Arbor, penetrating Mudrasil and severing the connection between the Luofu and Mudrasil, turning the tide of the war against the Abundance Legions. Aftermath. After the battle, the Rainbow Arbiter disappears, but the part of the body of the Flint Emperor still remains. Then, the 7 ships gather with a Xuling messenger to authenticate a declaration, share content, and reveal the details. This declaration is the final product, hereby creating the Xianzhou Alliance as it exists today. Skip ahead if you're not interested in the declaration in details, but I'm gonna recite what is written in the declaration. The Chinese version. 仙州联盟宣言序我仙州万民于兹盟誓决议，欲令后世免于清零攻伐，威仪苛暴之叛，摒除无量生苦，平等一切人之尊严与神圣权利，重申并呼吁公正与雅量，弃绝掠夺、压迫、剥削与酷刑，立复归凡身，根除寰宇不死劫难之志业，经久佛谢，当效以消干之勤劳，重启首眠，更翻轮替，弃满谢主，以避贤路，建云其君，镇境内外，涤荡孽寇，未避其州，立时王司，秉烛守夜，威伐最穷，弹协神往，共举六域，尊贤使能，筹资政事， 治御同盟。又是告慰四海，上至地宫，下达十王，名有星海浩瀚招摇，又有殉难三杰烈士英灵，以昭始至，原由七周期及虚灵之使者，见证与共，审效详备妥善，遂议定本宣言，盟曰仙州联盟。Second War of Abundance Prelude between year 5700 to 5749. 月眼 the Foxen Helmmaster of the Xianzhou Yaoqing Skyfaring Commission and the disciples of Sanctus Medicus, first Master Primus, left his position after witnessing the Antimatter Legion's destruction of Murdersil as the alliance stood by. Yue Yan's belief was shaken and he decided to rethink the long-life species' duty and purpose in life, driving a starskiff to roam the stellar seas in search for an answer. On the ancient planet of Rahu, Yue Yan found an emanator of the Yao Shi, a living entity called Shu Hu. Yue Yan witnesses how Shu Hu granted back life to Rahu, which had long ago become a dead planet. He followed Shu Hu and recorded their healing miracles and various teachings, ultimately composing the divine scripture of the secrets and miracles of Shu Hu's manifestation. War. Year 5749. During the resistance of the alliance against the abominations of abundance, the Intelligentsia Guild once dispatched a troop consisting of the learned to join the second of the abundance wars. The troop helped in defeating Shu Hu that besieged the Xianzhou Yuque. Aftermath, year 6300, the Xianzhou Changcheng is devoured by the activated planet Rahu, devourer of worlds. Jing Liu is one of the few survivors of the incident. Third War of Abundance Prelude. Year 7972, Yu Leho was born into one of the Borenson Pack, Bloodwind Pack, one of the beast ship operator family within a society like Borenson that honors strength above all. Beast ship operators from this generation like Yu Leho naturally held a relatively high level of political influence. Year 8023, Yu Leho already had her own personal fleet, the Preda. She had already independently planned and complete dozens of plunder and ransack missions. Year 8025, Yu Leho and the Bloodwind Pack chief Ho Xing Khan were married, as it is Borenson tradition for the chief's partner to act as the leader of all officials. Yu Leho has suddenly risen to the second highest rank within the Bloodwind Pack. Year 8032, Yu Leho gave birth to a child named Cheluwu. If everything went as planned, Cheluwu would become the next leader of the pack. Year 8038, originally Ho Xing Khan, the pack chief, had already exceeded 400 years of age without bearing an heir. If the regular route of succession were to be followed, the title of chief would go to the next Duran descendant, Ho Xing Khan's nephew, Kobo. However, the birth of Cheluwu has shattered this plan. After having prepared all his life to inherit the pack, Kobo led the 3,000-strong beast ship fleet that had sworn loyalty to him to reclaim his power and attack the chief's great beast ship. Ho Xing Khan had no time to react before he was murdered by his bodyguard and that Kobo had bribed. Naturally, Kobo's next targets would be Ye Leho and her son. Fortunately, Ye Leho had always retained her own fleet and vowed loyalty to her, the Petra. Although they had only boosted 300 ships, every member was a trusted ally that had accompanied her on pillages for many years. Yu Leho and her fleet successfully forced their way out of Kobo's encirclement. However, with the huge beast ship fleet that pursued them like locusts, there was no way for her mere 300 ships to escape. However, Kobo Khan called off his manhunt a short while later and returned to the Bloodwind Pack, successfully becoming the next chief. Yu Leho would never say how she managed to escape that lethal pursuit. All that we know is that her only child, Cheluwu, died during the escape. Yu Leho led the Petra with 127 men remaining to the Fanghu, determined to submit and pledge allegiance to the alliance after the death of her son at the hands of the Borenson Bloodwind Pack chief Kobo. Year 8040, after 2 long years of careful deliberation, the alliance decided to pardon these Borenson for their crimes and allowed them to live inside the Fanghu under strict surveillance. This was on the condition that they comply with all Alliance research on Borisin, as well as submitting all B-ship-related technology to them. This was also the time that Zhongguang met Yeleho. As a cultural anthropologist, they were ordered to interview the 127 Borisin in order to deepen the Xianzhou's understanding of Borisin society. Throughout the course of their research, Yeleho and Zhongguang developed a deep friendship. Likely because her hatred towards Kobo, Yeleho had always hoped that she would be able to let her Petra to fight for the alliance. However, a request like this was unlikely to receive approval. Yeleho made this request again and again and was rejected every time. Year 8070, Yeleho bore this cycle no longer and began to seek Zhongguang's assistance. Zhongguang suggested that she write a long letter explaining her life and background in detail. This would allow her to explain her hatred of her enemies to the 7 arbitrary generals and why she longs to fight for the alliance. War. Year 8072, the Yaoqing and the Fanghu alerts the Luofu about the assembly of the Dense Abundance army once more, as well as the revival of the Ketu Mirage, the roaming star, and an attack on the Fanghu. The Luofu dispatches 4 brigades of Cloud Knights to help them fight the Rainbow Fleet, Cui Hongwei, Bernard Boat Fleet, Chun Ting Wei, Pyroclane Fleet, Bi Fang Wei, and Star Lance Fleet, Chan Qiang Wei. Without receiving permission from the Alliance, Yeleho and the Petra launched their final assault, killing an unknown number of Dense Abundance. Diviner Fu Quan proposes a plan to the 6 charioteers of the Luofu to send out an SOS signal to the last observed location of the Rainbow's Lux Arrow, using the Yuque's Cloud-Pierce telescope, which would be shipped to the Fanghu using a Navis astrager. Just as the Xianzhou faces defeat, the Rainbow Arbiter did descend onto the physical plane and annihilates the Borisin fleet using their Lux Arrow, causing collateral damage to the field hospital. The Yuque's Master Diviner Jing Tian, who was the only person who had the permission to use the Cloud-Pierce telescope and could set out a signal in the format of the Rainbow's Decree, perishes on the Fanghu. General Yue Yu, who was on the battlefield with the Verdun Knights near the Cloud-Pierce telescope, is also killed in the blast. Fei Xiao, who was on the battlefield with them, brings back as many surviving soldiers as she can. She is saved by the field medic Jiao Qiu before the impact of the Lux Arrow reaches them. Yeleho and the Petra manages to transport at least 4,000 civilians to safety before the Rainbow's Lux Arrow descended. During this process, all 127 Borisin warriors, including Yeleho herself, perishes. Due to the sensitive nature of Yeleho's identity and her undeniable past wrongdoings, her story has been concealed under the surface of the history to this day. That is why My Return to the Path was never able to be published. She was an abomination of abundance that was full of evil, a covetous thief, and a criminal with blood-soaked hands. She was also a Xianzhou person who never gained recognition, a courageous warrior, and a mother filled with rage and sorrow. During the course of this battle, the Xianzhou Luofu loses over 63,000 fighter jets and over 120,000 pilots, and nearly 1/5 of the Xianzhou Fanghu stealth are destroyed by the Lux Arrow's bombardment. As for the overall casualties of the Xianzhou Alliance, among the near million pilots that participate in the air battle, not more than 100,000 survive. Among these pilots' casualties were Cai Yi and Guang Yuan's, Qing Li's biological parents. The aftermath. Around this time, Ling Sha and her master Yun Hua, the former cauldron master of the Luofu, are exiled from the Luofu to the Zhumin. This sentence is arbitrated and carried out by Jing Yuan. As the chief alchemist, Dan Shu becomes the acting head of the Luofu Alchemy Commission. The Xianzhou Fanghu stopped issuing new travel passes briefly due to the damage inflicted by the Third Abundance War. Due to the Vidyadhara's inability to reproduce, they permanently lost a large number of their population. After the new travel policy was put into place, the ship opened up to visitors once more. Yu Kong gives up flying and transferred to the Luofu Skyfaring Commission, eventually become the Hellmaster of the Luofu. She also adopts Qing Li. Dan Shu loses faith in the Rainbow Archer and becomes one of the leaders of the Disciples of Sanctus Medicus, gradually growing the organization and recruiting a large number of Luofu Alchemy Commission staff. Sometime after the death of General Yue Yu, Fei Xiao takes up office as General of the Xianzhou Yaoqing. Legacy of 3 of the Abundance Wars. Though once the most famous tourist attraction of the Xianzhou Lions ever since the Third Abundance War, the Xianzhou Fanghu had adopted self-preservation policies to recuperate. As a result, they had cut off most of their regular communications and trade with other Xianzhou ships, a decision from the Fanghu's high elder, Glacier Marun, implicitly stemming from the Yara's inability to produce offspring. Unfortunately, the place could no longer accommodate vast numbers of tourists in recent years. Shu Hu may have been sealed in a box following his defeat at the hands of Bai Hong from the High Cloud Quintet. At present, it is unsure if he is the one sealed in the box or not. The Ten Lords Commission has kept the box in the lowest level of the shackling prison for now, which must not be opened unless authorized by Marshal Hua and the Ten Lords altogether. Around year 8100, after 30 years of dispute and controversy, Yu Leho's post-human autobiography My Return to the Path is finally published. At March year 8100, after years of the organization growing unnoticed, the master of the disciples of Sanctus Medicus, Dan Shu, made contact with the Lord Ravager Phantilia. She agreed to help smuggle a Steron onto the Luofu. Phantilia promises to give them new undying bodies with the revived Ambrosial Arbor, which Dan Fu found agreeable due to the sad desires for more immortal bodies. The activities of the disciples of Sanctus Medicus started drawing attention from the seat of divine foresight and were eventually exposed. Afterward, Master Diviner Fu Shen launches an attack on the disciples of Sanctus Medicus forces in the Alchemy Commission. She and the Astral Express crew encounter Dan Shu, accompanied by the disciples of Sanctus Medicus. Dan Shu is defeated and succumbs to her injury, and the remaining disciples are arrested. On 2nd August year 8100, Ling Sha is appointed as the new Cauldron Master of the Luofu Alchemy Commission after Dan Shu's death, replacing her former master Yun Hua. After August year 8100 star calendar, reports from the Xianzhou Yaoqing revealed that Phantilia, taking on the guise of mangas, was organizing the Borising groups into larger packs following her defeat at Scale Gorge Waterscape, who believed that she would bring them back to greatness. Led by Lord Moktok of the Rhino Hound Pack, the Borising were able to infiltrate the Shackling prison. They were successfully in freeing the last word Hulei and escaped the prison. And the rest are continued in the Trailblaze Continuation mission during 2.4 and 2.5, so check that out to complete the story. Until 2.5, these are all we know about the Denizens of Abundance War so far in Honkai Star Rail. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. I'm your Down to Earth Honkai Star Rail enjoyer, Icicle, and I read Honkai Star Rail lore and secrets so that you don't need to. 愿此行终抵群星. May this journey lead us starward.